Hello, everyone. I would like to welcome you all to today's Vancouver Coastal Health Icon Indigenous Health Round. It's wonderful to have many friends joining us again, and also we know that there are new friends joining us today. So we want to welcome you all. My name is Kendall Ho. I'm the lead of the Digital Emergency Massing Unit and also the Executive Director of ICON, and have the pleasure of opening and moderating today's session. I would like to first do a land acknowledgement. This session today is occurring on the unceded ancestral and traditional territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. Today, we're very fortunate to have Cathy and Kwelkwáyel7simia, Wendy, Nahanee joining us to be our keynote speaker in speaking on the topic of uplifting cultural safety and Indigenous safety. And so really looking forward to that. I'd like to begin our session today first with an opening prayer by Elder Doris Fox, then followed by presentation by our guest speakers. Elder Doris is a Musqueam elder. Throughout the year, Elder Doris works at different wellness days as a life coach and healer, using various traditional healing methods taught to her by her elders and by various other Indigenous healers. Elder Doris sits on several advisory boards and committees and elder circles. As well, Elder Doris works at several health clinics as an elder and healer herself. Elder Doris Fox teaches various traditional arts and crafts, such as traditional salish weaving, cedar bark weaving, and beading. These are also taught to her by her elders. During her classes, Elder Doris ensures that the students know about the history, traditions, values, and beliefs behind the ancient knowledge that she shares. She also shares her knowledge generously of intellectual property and the importance of artists knowing how to protect themselves and their work. Elder Doris is an artist and clothing designer as well, and has taught sewing classes too. Elder Doris, it's our honor to have you here, and let me hand the time over to you, and thank you very much for doing the opening prayer for us.
Thank you very much, Kendall. Welcome, everyone. Welcome, everyone. To those of you who are in my home right now, I'm at UBC, so home of the Musqueam people, part of our home. If you can just get comfortable and make sure that you have both feet flat on the floor. Thank you. And just allow yourself to relax and listen to the sound of my voice. And I invite you to pray in your own way, but this is how I often do it. Great Spirit, we raise our hands in gratitude and honor to you for allowing us to come together in this beautiful circle. We humbly stand before you and ask that we invite everyone to have an open heart and an open mind so they can learn the most. We humbly ask that you continue to protect each one of us who are here in attendance and those who could not attend for one reason or another. We ask that you protect us all from harm, including the harm we sometimes do to ourselves. Help us to know and understand that we are not alone in the work that we do, that there are many others that stand with us. Help us to know that it's okay and acceptable to reach out for help, to ask for that help. We all think everyone else is doing so fabulous and doing great, and sometimes we're all struggling. So I ask personally that you reach out and ask for help, because the things that are going to be covered can sometimes cause pain in your heart. And that's okay, because that tells me that you have a heart, that you do care. So it's a good thing. We're human beings, and we each must feel and allow our emotions to speak for us. We thank everyone who is providing the information for us today to educate us, to help teach us about Indigenous cultural safety. But I ask that each one of you take the information that you're going to learn and apply it to all peoples, all areas of your life. It can only do wonderful things. We all need to treat each other the same way we would like to be treated ourselves. We have a saying my family says, "Natsamatst," we are all one. We're all one. And we need to stop labeling each other, stop putting us in boxes, separating us and keep us divided. We're all human beings and we need to respect each other and treat each other with the kindness, compassion, and love that it is our divine right to be treated as such. Great Spirit, we humbly ask that you bring an end to the wars, that you bring peace to the hearts of those who are causing the wars. Protect those who are being annihilated and oppressed by the fighting. Help them to see, Great Spirit, that there is enough for everyone, enough land, enough food, enough abundance in all areas of our life. Help them, Great Spirit, to put an end to the wars that are brought by egos. Please, Great Spirit, help us to take better care of our first sacred mother, Mother Earth. Help us so that we can take care of her, to help put out the fires when they come, to stop the flooding and anything else that happens in this world to cause us pain and sorrow. We thank you for all of this, Great Spirit, and I ask that you continue to protect and watch over each person's here, all their circles, their families, their friends, their co-workers, their community members. Protect them all and keep them all safe from harm. We raise our hands in gratitude to you, Great Spirit, for bringing us together yet again. Sďwx. Thanks, everybody. And I apologize that my camera is not working. All it shows is a little bright colored light. So you have to look at my picture. Sorry.
Well, Elder Doris, thank you so much. I really appreciate in such a wonderful, loving and calming way that you have started us off. And I can imagine you're really a smiling, lovely face as you do the prayer. So thank you so much for doing that.
Thank you, Kendall. Thank you.
Thank you. So folks, I like to get our rounds moving forward. First, just to let everyone know that we are recording this session, just as we have done before. And for many of you, you may have visited our rounds page, where the previous recordings are there for us to continue to learn and reflect on. And so it's the same way here that we'll be recording these sessions. So I would like you to know this about that. Also, please remember that there is a Q&A function that if you can input your questions or comments throughout the session in the Q&A session, we will have a discussion time at from around 1 o'clock. And so from 12 to approximately 12:50, that our speakers will be presenting. And then we'll have a 10-minute Q&A for those who may have to leave at 1 o'clock, but the Q&A actually extend to 1:30. And so we'll have lots of time for discussion, and usually that's a really interactive and really great learning for all of us involved. I certainly would like to thank our partners. I'd like to thank Vancouver Coastal Health, Indigenous Health in partnering in these wonderful rounds. I really want to thank Ministry of Health support and also the engagement of Vancouver Physician Staff Association in supporting these rounds, and also First Nations Health Authority as a great partner to join us in this. In the planning of these sessions, I appreciate the Engaging Physicians in the Indigenous Cultural Safety Committee in the VPSA, Vancouver Physician Staff Association, the members who are helping us to do this planning. This includes Cathy Sierra Roberts, Indigenous patient partners, Cooper Jackson, Sharon Mercer, and also Dr. Anis Latka, Dr. Chet Kim Singh, Dr. Don Wilson, Dr. Jay Slater, Dr. Shannon Turvey, Dr. Terry Aldrich to join us. And I really appreciate my ICON team joining together. We're very grateful for the foundational support of the BC Ministry of Health Patients as Partners initiative. We've developed a long-standing relationship over the past 10 years in advancing patient and family-centered care. And Ministry of Health continues to advance the shared journey of reconciliation, apply equity and anti-racism approaches, and address systemic racism in the health system. This is recognized in the ministry's mandate letter that states that ministry will continue working towards true and meaningful reconciliation by supporting opportunities for Indigenous people to be full partners in the inclusive and sustainable province we're building together. In this work, the Ministry of Health continues to address recommendations from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada's call to action on DRIP and the In Plain Sight report. For more information, please visit the patientsaspartners.ca webpage for any events and resources from the Ministry of Health. I'd very much also like to acknowledge Vancouver Coastal Health Indigenous Health, the partnership with them with Leslie Blanchard, our VP in Vancouver Coastal Health. VCH plays a critical role in upholding the Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples Acts, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada, and the calls to action, and in implementing the 24 recommendations of the In Plain Sight report. Together, we commit to celebrating Indigenous ways of knowing and being, and to acknowledging the strength and courage demonstrated while enduring generations of atrocities, and to embedding Indigenous cultural safety across the health system. And again, really appreciate Vancouver Physician Staff Association supporting this work and joining with the planning and stewardship of this as we work together to engage physician communities and health professionals together to build a more collaborative, inclusive, and caring community to support the best patient care, as well as the First Nations Health Authority and their engagements and partnership in their individual guidance and support through the committee and the planning of these rounds. All right, let me introduce our two guest speakers. Tremendous to have them here with us. We're honored to have Cathy and Kwelkwáyel7simia Wendy Nahanee to join us in today's guest speakers. They'll guide us on a discussion of uplifting Indigenous cultural safety. What does that look like, Indigenous cultural safety in healthcare? And how do we build trust? And how do we avoid pitfalls when providing care for Indigenous patients? Very excited to have Cathy and Wendy joining us. Cathy is Cree, Gwich'in, and Scottish. She's a member of the Northwest Territories Métis Association. Cathy won the International Association of Public Participation, or IAP2, Indigenous Engagement Award with the BC Patient Safety and Quality Council in 2022 for her work with the late Bill Blackwater Jr., Gitxsan Hereditary Chief, and many other Indigenous leaders and the patient voices across the province. Cathy currently works at the Vancouver Coastal Health, Indigenous Health, as Director of Indigenous Cultural Safety. She has a graduate degree in leadership and bridges over 30 years of experience in engagement, teaching, leadership training, and program design in health and academics. Kwelkwáyel7simia Wendy Nahanee is from the Squamish Nation. She was born and raised in North Vancouver, a village formerly known as Ashland. Wendy is a host nation matriarch and mother of one Menman, or one child. She lives and works in the village formerly known as Kemkemala, or East Vancouver, where she, amongst many other hats she wears, is the appointed chair for the Urban Indigenous Advisory Council for the City of Vancouver, chair of the Downtown East Side Powwow, and sits on the board of directors of Britannia, Carnegie, and the Downtown East Side Indigenous Peoples Day celebration. Professionally, Wendy is the Indigenous Strategic Lead for Indigenous Cultural Safety at Vancouver Coastal Health. So Cathy and Wendy, let me hand the session over to you. I'm really looking forward to the learnings and listening to you.
Thank you so much, Kendall. I don't know what else to say about myself. You've said it all. Skszwx, Halton Squalawin, and Chinquen Matomi, Kwelkwáyel7simia, Quit Shaman, Wendy Nahanee, Sḳwx Othomeo, E Oslahan Omeo. I shared in my language, hello everybody. I have a good feeling in my heart today to be here doing this good work with all of you. Thank you all for showing up and really getting ready to do some good work with us. I shared that my name is Kwelkwáyel7simia, and that loosely translates to Daybreak Woman, and my nickname is Wendy Nahanee. And as Kendall shared, I am from the Squamish Nation, and specifically the village formerly known as Oslahan, and now colonially referred to as North Vancouver. Today, I'm zooming in from the village formerly known as Kamkamalai, or loosely East Vancouver, and it is my great pleasure to be here in these unceded occupied shared territories with my relatives at Musqueam and Skszwx. I am a host nation matriarch. I am the mother of one little munmun, although my little munmun is 18 years old now and about a foot taller than me. He's always going to be my little baby. I have 2 fur babies that I rescued. I don't know how I wound up with a Chihuahua and a Pomeranian, but it is what it is. I am a daughter, granddaughter, great-great-great-granddaughter to all my ancestors in the stars. I am a cool auntie, I'm a fun cousin, I'm hopefully a good colleague, good community member. Really pleased to be here today as I shared. And I just want to give you a little bit of background about myself. As I did share, that I was raised in a very traditional home in North Vancouver, or Oslahan, with both of my parents in the home, and my grandparents were just a block away, and all the aunties and cousins. We were just one big happy family, just roaming around the res. I was schooled at a very young age about how rich our culture is and how rich our heritage is, about our territories and all the gifts contained in these territories, like the cedar, the salmon, the elk. Now, I was forcibly removed from my home when I was 5 years old, and that's what really began my lifelong learning of really understanding what it means to be an Indigenous person in this country, what it meant to be an Indigenous child in that school system, what it means to be Indigenous in the healthcare system, and what it means to be an Indigenous woman in these colonial, patriarchal constructs of Canada. The many faces of racism and forms of genocide and all the trauma that I carry because of it. But you know what else I carry? I carry tens of thousands of years of medicines, of teachings, of ceremony and songs, of strength and resilience. It is my great pleasure to be here today. I look forward to working together in a good way. Wosiam.
Masicho, Kwelkwáyel7simia. Jingwizi, Nokwe Nain Jinjit Show Adili. That is a good day and good to see all of you today. As Kendall has introduced us, I'm Cathy Almost, and I am an intergenerational residential school survivor, and I am he's listed my heritage as well, and that's super helpful. I had an urban upbringing, so slightly different from Kwelkwáyel7simia. And I have been on a journey of learning, and as you probably may or may not know, that is really what Indigenous cultural safety is a journey of learning. And so thank you so much for taking time out of your day today to spend time learning and how to do this in a good way. We wanted to talk a little bit about our backgrounds first. So I am a wife, I am a sister, I am a friend, I am a cousin, I am an auntie. And I have this amazing opportunity to affect healthcare providers in a good way in Indigenous cultural safety. And what does that look like? So in a former life, I worked for the BC Patient Safety Quality Council, and I was able to take a course with Nicola Valley Institute of Technology and Davis McKenzie. Many of you on the line will know Davis. And what we were doing was we were doing Indigenous communications. And so I had this amazing opportunity to investigate, what does culturally safe care look like from a physician perspective? What would physicians really like to know about it? So I was able to reach out, and I actually had responses from 60%, so I was really pleased with that, of the physicians I surveyed. And they have informed this discussion today. I was also part of an amazing group of Indigenous patients from the Patient Voices Network, and the Indigenous patients have really carried me on their shoulders in so many ways as they have taught me and as we walk together in looking at what cultural safety looks like, and we're going to talk about that further on in this talk. I wanted to just, in my family and friends, I also want to acknowledge that my family and friends and colleagues have taught me so much as well on this lifelong journey as we're walking together and as we're moving to make the world safer and just a better place for Indigenous health. Just a couple quotes from the physicians themselves as to what they said they were wanting to understand. One doctor said that they wanted a general understanding of what cultural safety is, and how it applies to various aspects of healthcare, and Indigenous health outcomes would be very helpful. Another physician said they wanted ways to build trust with patients, and what are potential pitfalls that might be blind spots, and how can we avoid those? That would be very practical. And the last one I'll share right now is one physician stated a broader understanding of what it means to be Indigenous. And what happens when accessing healthcare services? That would be super useful. So we're going to talk about self-determination and give you a definition of that in case you're not familiar. So we'll move into the slide deck now, and we will take you through a journey. We have asked our colleague and trusted friend, Dr. Don Wilson, to give a presentation to us about what would his desire be for healthcare providers and cultural safety. So we wanted to offer him an opportunity to speak to all of you. So we've taken some video of him, and we're very grateful to Eduardo and Jess from Vancouver Coastal Health for their help in this, and to Dr. Don himself. So we'll let you hear his words about what he would like to say to you about Indigenous cultural safety.
I was born and raised in Bella Bella, BC, and I'm a member of the Sďwx Nation. I'm an obstetrician gynecologist. I've been in practice now for just over 17 years. I have the role with Vancouver Coastal Health Authority as the Regional Medical Director of Indigenous Health. I just embarked on, I would say, the most important and enjoyable role of my life, in that I just became a grandpa. Indigenous people experience the healthcare system as a treacherous journey from the time they walk in the door until they leave. This is my heart goal. I would love it if my family members could walk into any healthcare facility or clinic or hospital or emergency department, and the last thing on their mind is being worried about how they might be treated because they are Indigenous. And we are a long ways from my loved ones being able to do that. So that's what I'm working towards, and why I would invite other healthcare providers to think about that. Someone who's asking in a heartfelt way to please make the system safer. I just want a better world, and I want a better system of healthcare for Indigenous people. It's that simple. And how that looks, how do we get from where we are now to that better world and that better place? We're figuring it out, and we're figuring it out together. And I'm inviting other people to join me, to join other people who are working in Indigenous health on that journey of moving from where we are now to that better, safer healthcare system for Indigenous people. Because in so doing, it enriches all of us, and it makes the healthcare system better for everyone. We are willing to share with the wider world. And I think engaging with us in that journey and helping us in that journey would be a very gratifying thing. I really, really want to see those changes for Indigenous people.
So thank you, Dr. Don, for sharing with us your heart and for always helping us move forward in a really good way. And we appreciate that. And I also wanted to acknowledge Elder Doris and thank you for your words as well, and helping us to be reminded that we are all one and we are all needing to work together in a good way. As we look at Indigenous cultural safety, what does that look like? Is it, sometimes I've heard it used in the same sentence or as replacing equity, diversity, and inclusion. And what we wanted to just highlight for you is that they are two different things. Diversity, equity, and inclusion and Indigenous cultural safety are not the same, but they do overlap. And where they overlap is they overlap on safety and psychological safety. There are many evidence-based documents, and we're going to talk about some of those today, that show you what has happened in healthcare with Indigenous patients. And so there are many stories, there are many evidence-based documentation of what has happened to us as Indigenous people to cause our health disparities. And we're going to unpack that a little bit too. But why is it Indigenous cultural safety? It is because of the stolen land, the stolen language, and the stolen culture that has happened over the past years in the occupation of already occupied Turtle Island. And so we are not saying that there should not be safety. There should be psychological safety for everyone and cross-cultural understanding. But Dr. Ramsden in New Zealand coined the term Indigenous cultural safety. And because Maori people and Indigenous people in Turtle Island in Canada have experienced the same, we understand the genocide that has happened for New Zealand as well as for Indigenous people. And so that is why Indigenous cultural safety has become so important. And we're going to go into some detail about that and talk to you about that in the future. We'll move on to the next slide. There we go. I'll pass it over to Kwelkwáyel7simia.
OCM, Cathy, and yes, OCM to my Auntie Doris for that beautiful prayer and really setting the grounding for this good work to happen in a good way. So Cathy alluded to the reports, and I'm hopefully many of you have read the reports. I just want to share a quote from the In Plain Sight report, which states, "A culturally safe environment can only be defined by the Indigenous person receiving care, and does not profile or discriminate against this person, but is experienced as respectful, safe, and allows a meaningful communication and service." So I'm just wondering if anybody has read the In Plain Sight report or the recommendations, and if they're able to share anything that they've been able to implement in their professional practice and or their personal life. Just wanting to say that In Plain Sight describes findings of widespread systemic racism, stereotyping, and discrimination against Indigenous peoples in British Columbia in their healthcare system. In particular, 84% of Indigenous peoples describe personal experiences of racism and discrimination that discouraged them from seeking necessary care and that reduced access to care, negatively affecting their health. These outcomes reinforce the stereotypes and perpetuate the cycle of inequity. So what we really want you to do is take some time to do those deeper dives and self-reflective. Indigenous culturally safe care takes time. So it's going to take time for us to sort of unlearn, unwind some bias, and replace those with these good teachings and findings with these reports so that we can move forward together in an Indigenous culturally safe way. And I believe the link to the In Plain Sight report is in the chat. Thank you. Okay, so I want to talk about the link between colonialism and Indigenous health disparities. And there's a widespread belief that colonialism happened and it's over. But colonialism is very much alive and well in this country, and sadly, and the links to our Indigenous health disparities are proven facts. So wanting to talk first and foremost about the the Indian residential schools of 1863 and ongoing. So as many of you know that the last school did not close until 1996, so that's not so far back in the history. And that ongoing intergenerational trauma of the survivors of the residential schools, like myself and like my director Cathy and my Auntie Doris have shared, that that trauma continues for the generations to come, and we have to do the work to really break those cycles. So just wanting to talk about the health disparities as a direct result of the government policies to assimilate and exterminate Indigenous peoples. That there's nothing inherently deficient in Indigenous peoples, and health disparities are not attributed to Indigenous peoples simply because we are Indigenous. Indian residential schools of 1863 and ongoing, that most Canadians don't really understand the harsh truths and the impacts that it continues to have on our people, and the health disparities that we continue to face. Indian residential schools really laid the foundation for the epidemics that we see in Indigenous communities today, affecting physical health, mental health, emotional health, and spiritual wellness. And in addition to the cultural and social effects of being forcibly displaced, the children suffer physical, sexual, psychological, and spiritual abuse. Lasting effects include severe health disparities such as substance abuse, increased suicide rates, increased criminal activity, and lack of community engagement. Although many of our people did survive the residential schools, many of our people were not able to reintegrate back into their communities when they did return home. And then we'll move on a little bit to the Indian Act, which from 1876 and ongoing is still part of Canadian law. It was forcibly removing Indigenous peoples from their traditional lands and waterways, removing access to the foods that had sustained them for time immemorial, detrimentally compromises Indigenous peoples' immune systems, resulting in a state of forced dependency, lack of self-determination that continues to adversely affect the living conditions to this day. The aftermath involves unfathomable health inequities such as chronic illness, diabetes, obesity, food insecurity, mental health crises, and incomparable to the rest of any population of Canada. And the Indian Act is the single most important act that continues to affect Indigenous peoples to this day. So really taking that, it's a lot to digest, I get that. So just take your time to do that self-reflection, digest it at your pace, do some research, have questions, be curious. That's part of reconciliation. Thank you. So, and then in echoing what I've just shared, I'm just wanting to share some of these startling statistics with you. The life expectancy of Indigenous peoples are generally 15 years shorter than non-Indigenous peoples. So simply by being born Indigenous, we already have 15 years less life to live. Our suicide rates in some communities are 9 times higher than that of the rest of the population of Canada. And heart disease is 50% greater than non-Indigenous peoples. And those are just some of the startling statistics that we can link directly to the health impacts of colonialism.
So this is some work that I alluded to that had been part of my work at the BC Patient Safety Quality Council, but it applies to our talk today because it talks about what does culturally safe care look like. And these wonderful people were part of a virtual circle. So one of the maybe positive things of COVID, if I've ever heard that said in a sentence, I'm not sure, but we actually got together virtually. And so I was able to bring the Indigenous population world together virtually. So we were teaching people how to use Zoom, as you all know, as we all got onto our virtual platforms. And this group came together, and this group is a group of people. I want to highlight the person 2 down from myself. This is Bill Blackwater Jr., Sığwx Mouse. He and I were able to create this circle together. And what we did was we were able to ask this group of people, what does culturally safe engagement look like to you? And how can we do that in a good way? And so we hosted the meeting, and we had 13 Indigenous participants participate. And by chance, we had 13 organizations. It wasn't set up that way that they would be 13 and 13. We had the Ministry of Health, we had BC Cancer, we had all of the health authorities and Doctors of BC. And we can go on to the next slide. And what we did was we asked people about culturally safe care and what does that look like? And this is the result of our conversation. We were able to theme the conversations in the small groups, send back the materials back to the people who spoke it and say, is this what you said? And they agreed that this was what they said. And then we were able to hire an Indigenous artist, Bert Azak from Vancouver. He's Sḳwx, and he developed this beautiful artwork based on the 7 sacred teachings. And if you've never heard of the 7 sacred teachings, we'll welcome you to Google that and find out more information about that. And he tied each principle into a beautiful piece of his own artwork. And then we were able to develop the documents you see beside it. And that is what we won the Indigenous Association for Public Participation Award for our Indigenous engagement. So this was very much a team effort and very much done in a good way through the leadership of Tammy Hofer and Bill Blackwater Jr. And sometimes people say, what does culturally safe care look like? Well, this document actually takes you through actions that you can take to learn more about cultural safety. So that's why we've applied it here, so that you're able to take a look at the document further on your own time and lean into what are the actions that I can take to increase my knowledge about culturally safe care. And we'll just move on to the next slide, because Bill Blackwater Jr. passed away. Gives you a little bit more detail about all of the principles themselves. So what we've given is we've given a statement about each principle, and then we've given actions. And these are the statements from the Indigenous voices themselves. And I'll just highlight a couple for you. When we think about culturally safe care, you can do some learning on your own. You can Google things, you can find out whose territory you're on or who you were raised on, where you were raised from. And you can also understand Indigenous people and their desire to be more relational and build relationships. What does that look like? Kindness and empathy, always being human first. How can we get more to that in the healthcare system? What does that look like I know that there's been some different things like introducing yourself with your name, and what does it look like to just give that little bit extra time in listening to somebody and making sure to check back in that what you think you've heard is what you've heard. Those are just some ways that you can show culturally safe care. We'll move to the next slide, and this is Gitxsan Hereditary Chief Simigat Mouse Blackwater Jr., and as I was saying, he passed away shortly after we did this work. And this was his last message to us, and it still rings true. His hope was that the relationship would improve between Indigenous patients and the healthcare providers, and that we would continue to do this work in a good way. And his biggest hope is that the witnesses and partners would be convinced by the message to the extent that they would continue to seek ways that their organizations would improve relationships with Indigenous patients. So we're encouraging you through Bill Blackwater's words to continue doing that and to find ways to engage Indigenous voices and to also move the work forward in a good way, because we need to work together for reconciliation. We have to work together in order to do this work in a good way. And it takes a lot of different voices to do that. So we encourage you to work together with us.
Yeah, OCM, absolutely, Cathy. It does take a team effort. I just wanting to talk about what does culturally safe care look like to us as Indigenous peoples, as Indigenous patients, as Indigenous on the receiving end of the healthcare. And so I wanted to share, I am aware of Indigenous family and friends presenting to hospital in pain after suffering at home for far too long because they had experienced unsafe racist treatment in the healthcare system, and then decided that the pain was just too much, so they did present. And hurtful assumptions were made, such as they were drunk or they were high. Some of my family and friends' concerns were just completely dismissed altogether. And one person was even asked to leave the hospital after not even receiving an exam or medications, as the provider had labeled her a drug seeker, even though they did not know her or examine her. So in thinking of those examples, wanting to flip it around, so what would the culturally safe care have looked like? And just echoing some of the sentiments of the principles of cultural safety that Cathy shared, please look at and treat Indigenous peoples and patients as human beings. So what if that was your family member? How would you want them to be treated in that situation? You would want them to be treated with respect. So really setting the tone of mutual respect, balancing that power dynamic and enabling collaboration is a wonderful way to build trust. Being aware of your tone and body language, as you may unknowingly be causing harm. That is a really big one for us. So we're generally gentle speakers. I tend to have a longhouse voice, but that's just in my DNA. So coming into the room in an aggressive way, in a loud voice, and even a firm handshake, that's aggressive to us. That feels unsafe to many Indigenous peoples. So being aware that you may not even be aware that you may be causing harm in that way. So, taking that time to take that deep breath and present as a human talking to another human. And allowing family members to sit with their with the patients and speak on their behalf if needed. We are relational people. We're familial people. So taking that time, like I said, it takes an extra couple of minutes to start to build that Indigenous cultural safety, but the rewards are immediate and pay off in big ways.
Thank you so much for that. Self-determination is actually something that I wanted to just spend a moment on, because sometimes you may have heard self-determination, but you're not exactly sure what does that mean. And so I have permission to share the story of my friend, and she had a son, and he was in pain, and he said, you know, Mom, I'm feeling really sick. And so she's like, okay, just want to make sure you're really sick. So let's just wait just a little bit before we call the hospital. And so that's part of self-determination, because she knows that if she goes and there's nothing wrong, that she will be sent home and sort of embarrassed a little bit, or shamed possibly. So there's concern there. So 30 minutes later, he was still not feeling well. And so she's like, okay, I got to call. So she calls, she gets the word that, you know, she's in a remote community, she's living on a reservation, and she has to drive her son because there is no ambulance services to her community. So she has to drive her son for 3 hours. So they hop into the vehicle, they stop on the way because there's a hospital on the way, but they're not an operating hospital. So she has to get some medications there and then continue on. She gets to where the operation is going to be done, and she has to get in to get him a wheelchair because he's not able to walk on his own. So she gets into the hospital emergency, gets the wheelchair, brings it out, puts her son into the wheelchair, wheels him in. She has to take a bile break because she's been driving for so long. So she leaves her son for just a couple minutes. And when she comes back out, there's a nurse calling her son's name. And then the nurse makes a comment to her. How come your son's not answering? Doesn't even know his own name. And now her son is not a little child. Her son is 18 years old. And so what culturally safe care would look like in that scenario? Well, sorry, back to self-determination. I'm getting distracted. The self-determination is that she knew she could receive racist care, but she decided that she needed to persist in her treatment in receiving care to save her son's life, because she was determined. That's where the determination comes in, to get the care that her son needed. And so back to the culturally safe part of this story is that it would have been so great had the nurse just treated her like someone who was in need of care. And what would that look like? Not making a comment about her son not knowing his own name, because what had happened was his gallbladder was about to burst and he was in medical distress. And so later on, the nurse realized that and started being super nice to my friend, but it would have been nice if she had just been super nice at the beginning. So that's an example of culturally safe care and self-determination. I'll pass it back to Wendy to talk about trust building.
Yes, thank you, Cathy. So wanting to talk about, so how can we build that trust? So oftentimes Indigenous patients in the healthcare system, that relationship is broken, as we know from In Plain Sight and many other reports, and just in general knowledge that Indigenous peoples have not been treated well or fairly in the healthcare system. And in fact, a lot of harm has been done. So the question we get asked is, how do we start to repair that relationship? And how do we build trust to let our patients know that we are in fact here to deliver them the care that they so willingly deserve, as any human being does. So the quality of your relationship with Indigenous peoples is measured by the effort invested and the integrity of your team. So think about that for a quick moment. That's a big sentence that carries a lot of impact. So really thinking about how much effort have you invested in that, researching Indigenous culturally safe care, learning about whose lands and territories you're on, thinking about a relational introduction when you're working with Indigenous patients. So making use of existing Indigenous culturally safe training and educational opportunities, reading the reports, In Plain Sight, Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women's, TRC, and thoughtfully acknowledging the history and ongoing racism in Canada and the impacts of that. Self-awareness, so learning and unlearning, as I shared before. You know, people say, well, I wasn't taught this in school, but we were taught this sort of socialization of anti-Indigenous racism as the undertone of the Canadian curriculum. So having to unlearn that, and potentially what maybe your family bias was, or your uncle, we all have that uncle. So thinking about how do we unwind that bias and replace it and move forward in this good way. So that's going to require that self-reflection and self-awareness. Work to be aware of and eliminating your own systemic biases and stigmas. Indigenous culturally safe care takes time. It takes an extra 30 seconds. It takes an extra 3 minutes. And I know you're all very, very busy, as we all are, but really thinking about how can I present myself in this good way to build a relationship of trust with these Indigenous patients that has been fractured for so long. In order to create culturally safe space, appropriate time needs to be included to ensure the culturally safe care for our Indigenous patients. So I hope that gives you some jumping off points there, and we look forward to your feedback in the question and answer period.
Yeah, the next slide goes into the in plain sight report. And I'm just going to talk about the elephant in the room and the question of Mary Ellen Turpolafon's indigeneity. I'm not going to comment on whether she is or not, but the fact is that 8,000 people did tell their stories in this document, and this document does still hold true in the fact that these people trusted her and there was documentation of actual discrimination and racism. This particular slide here is taken from page 33 of In Plain Sight report, and this chart is just directly taken right out of the report. And we wanted to talk about pitfalls, and so this was the best way we thought we could show you pitfalls. So ongoing stereotyping pitfalls. Some people, when they present, as you all know, who are medical professionals, they can present as intoxication, but it could be something else. And I'll just draw your attention to Keegan's story. Rhiannon Millman was his caregiver, and that was a very public story, and Keegan presented with methanol poisoning, but it looked like intoxication. So what could it be if it's not alcohol is a question that you might want to ask yourself when you're providing care. So we'll go to the next slide. This slide just talks about the pictures, and I've heard people say, oh, I treat everybody equally and I don't see color. So two of those statements we want to correct for you. It's okay to see color. It's just not okay to treat a colored person differently. We need to see people's background and realize that they have a different background. And the statement about we need to treat everybody equally, I'll let Kwelkwáyel7simia talk just briefly about that on this picture here.
Yeah, you bet. So just wanting to really look at the reality photo first, the one on the far left, and we see the young girl. We reflect her as the Indigenous girl in this world. And so treating everybody equal, they still don't get the same care because everybody is not equal. You know, our people, some of our people start below the ground there, and other people start way up high in the sky. So that equal care is non-existent. So, and we shouldn't treat people equal because we're not equal. We're all different. We all have different backgrounds. And so really recognizing that and respecting that historical intergenerational trauma that our people carry. And so keeping us down in this space. And that's also part of the government's policies. It's purposeful. Indian reservations were not an accident. So then talking about where the girl starts and observing the visual patriarchy of this image is really startling to me because you know, many of the Coast Salish family members up and down the coast here, we are matriarchal. So that means we hold our women in the highest regard. But in this colonial construct of this country of Canada, you know, it's very much a patriarchal society. So in recognizing that visual image, it's very startling to me. And then, Cathy, did you want to talk about equity and justice?
Yeah, for sure. I'll just take us home just on the last two pictures. I've seen this slide many times and looked at it, and one time it all of a sudden hit me. I was like, is that really justice? Wouldn't justice be the Indigenous people in the stands watching the game with everybody else instead of standing at the sidelines? So I let that sink in for a while. And every now and then I think about my intergenerational wealth that I've been able to do on occupying somebody else's lands as well. And so this was a startling picture of that, because justice would be Indigenous people purchasing tickets and also observing. We'll go to the next slide, please. We want to know if you've looked at any of these reports, because that is where the action happens. There are recommendations. I hear often, we need more Indigenous stories. We need to document more Indigenous stories. The Indigenous stories are here. We need more actions on recommendations. We need more people to look at their own personal bias, and we need people to figure out how they fit in the story of reconciliation. What can I do? What is my sphere of influence? If you're here from a health authority or the Ministry of Health, or if you're here from Doctors of BC, or if you're a practicing physician, or if you're an individual, how can you participate in reconciliation, and what might that look like for you? We're putting different links of the reports in the chat so that you can take a look at some of them if you haven't. Truth and Reconciliation is on the left, the United Nations Declaration on Rights of Indigenous People in plain sight. DRIPA, the Declaration of Rights for Indigenous People Actions, and Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women is on the far right. All right, it is 12:50. I think we have one more slide, and that is our closing activity. So Wendy, I'll let you take that away.
I will take it away. Thank you, Cathy. So right now, what we would like to, we are inviting you to share in the Q&A is what have you learned about Indigenous culturally safe care today? If you could share that in the question and answer, and we'll let that fall like a waterfall as we lead ourselves into reflecting upon that.
So I think the chat is enabled. Alex, are you there?
Hi, Cathy. Yes, for the participants to chat, they will not be able to enter anything into the chat. So
They
please
can't. They have to use Q&A. Perfect.
Q&A. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. Just want to make sure we were given the right directions of where to enter what they had learned about cultural safety. So thank you. And if you do have any questions, please be asking those also in the Q&A. So we'll turn things back over to Kendall.
Wonderful. Cathy and Wendy, really appreciate the excellent teaching and sharing and really true reflections on these. I am delighted that there are already many excellent questions and comments in the Q&A. I'd like to take the chance to welcome folks to do so. Before we open up the Q&A, maybe I'll just look at a couple of poll questions. Maybe Alex, if you can, or Karen, you can help me with the poll questions. May I have the first one that goes up? Now, including you, how many people are watching this session on the same device? So if you can just give us an estimate of that, that would be very helpful for me. So if you can vote now, which I'm seeing an active poll going on, and we'll go for another 3 or 4 seconds before we close the poll. All right. Good stuff. Many of you are seeing this on your device, and a few of you are having more than one person joining. Wonderful. Thank you. All right. Shall we go for the second poll question? I've learned something that will help me provide and facilitate culturally safe care today. So if I can ask you to vote, and again, I'm seeing some really active voting happening here, which is fantastic. All right. Excellent. We'll close the poll again in about 3 or 4 seconds. If you want to keep voting, that'd be great. Wow, fantastic. So it looks like looks like 95% agree or strongly agree to the fact that they have learned some things. I also welcome those who are not in those categories. Welcome those that are. Enter your thoughts in the Q&A. Those that are not, really also want to welcome your thoughts how we can potentially make this session helpful for you or your thoughts on this particular session. Thank you very much. All right. I do know that there are quite a few people who may have to leave at 1 o'clock, but of course, this session goes to 1:30. So momentarily, we'll go to the Q&A. But before I do so, our next round, just to let people know, is on December 4th from 12 to 1:30 p.m., which is now shown on your slide. We have Dr. Terry Aldred from First Nations Health Authority, Lisa Reed, and also Scott Graham joining us on that. So watch for that sessions. And if you have registered for this session, I believe we'll be able to send you information as this session comes up. All right, Cathy and Wendy, let me first start. Erica, thank you for your comment back in 1229. I just finished reading the report. I recently saw a colleague that there's update on the recommendations on the, I believe she's referring to the In Plain Sight report. Our team reviewing, examining connections in our organizations. So thanks, Erica, for that comment. In terms of the update of those recommendations, are they actively being reviewed, or are they periodically reviewed, or how do we continue to submit suggestions or learn from them? Maybe Cathy and Wendy, welcome your reflection on that.
So the recommendations for the reports are being monitored. Is that what the question is? Are they being monitored?
Oh no, she was saying that she has seen updates on the recommendation that was published, and so she's incorporating the new recommendations. So so that's great. And my question is, how often do they get updated, or are they monitoring of that?
Yeah, I'm not sure the answer. Go ahead.
I don't think that they're being updated so much as that people are checking in to see how they're implementing it. I did see on the news that they made a report about how they've implemented them. And I believe the updated one is just to say where we're at in terms of the recommendations. That's that update. So just to sort of check in and say, hey, we gave you these recommendations. You made these promises. Like, let's make sure these aren't empty promises again. So really holding people accountable, I think, is what you're talking about.
Excellent.
And I know that Yellowhead Institute is also tracking the Truth and Reconciliation recommendations and the advancement of that. So if people are interested, they can Google that.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Meanwhile, Dr. Dawn Wilson, thank you very much for your comments in the Q&A. Really appreciate that a lot. Andrea, thanks for your question. Are there any changes to the Indian Acts that would improve health outcomes for Indigenous people, or does the Indian Act needs to be thrown out? So Dawn has a great response there, and I'll just quickly show one that summarizes it quite well. She's saying that if we make incremental changes to the Indian Act, it's like removing flies from your soup and thinking the soup is still good for you. Cathy and Wendy, welcome your perspective on the Indian Act. Can we make changes, or should we throw them all out?
I have a saying that I like to share: burn sage, burn sweetgrass, burn the Indian Act.
If you haven't read 21 Things I Don't Know About the Indian Act by Bob Joseph, I would highly recommend that. And I would also recommend True Reconciliation by Jody Raybould Wilson. Those two books will answer some of your questions and help inform you about how the Indian Act is still affecting lives today and perspectives on that. So it is still, enfranchisement is still very real. Different things are still happening to Indigenous people based on the Indian Acts and reservations and etc. So,
thank you. Dawn also recommended the book 21 Things You May Not Know About the Indian Act, also in that chat. So thank you very much. Our next question from anonymous attendee. Thank you for your question. Why are non-Indigenous peoples the baseline for comparison of Indigenous community health and wellness?
I'm not sure that that's true, actually. I'm pretty sure that when Indigenous people are compared to the rest of Canada or the rest of North America, it's not only white perspectives. Is that what the person's saying?
The person is saying that, you know, sometimes for the management or support of Indigenous community health and wellness, sometimes the non-Indigenous approach, it becomes the baseline for comparison. Is that fair? Is that not fair? What do you think?
Oh, I wasn't understanding the question. Thank you for restating it. Yeah, I'm thinking that it is, as my Elder Doris just talked about in Naxamat, and we are all one, and how we do, I know that Kwelkwáyel7simia also talked about how we need a little bit more time with people, and we need a little bit more kindness and a little bit more reflection. I think that that is super important as we move forward in a good way to help people. So I don't know if you have anything to add to that, Kwelkwáyel7simia.
Yeah, I just wanting to add, like, when we look back, you know, there's like 500 years of colonization, and it's going to take 500 more years to decolonize that. So really thinking about, it's not so much as that comparison, because as we shared, like, nobody's equal and we can't compare apples to oranges, but there isn't really any other population in the country to base the statistics on in terms of Indigenous health disparities versus non-Indigenous health disparities.
Excellent.
And Dr. Dawn also answered the question, so thank you, Dr. Dawn, for your answer there. I was just checking out the question and saw your response. I appreciate that.
Yes, thank you. And anonymous attendee, if I have misrepresented your question, please re-ask it or further clarify that for me. So I appreciate that a lot. And thank you for asking that question. Gilbert at 1242 asked a good question. Oftentimes, Frontline staff are preoccupied with their work, and it comes across as indifference. Clearly, they're not aware of how their behavior can be negatively perceived and experienced. So being fully present for all patients is one way to cultivate cultural safety. And Darren supports that. This is so true. Just being mindful of being present during these interactions. Welcome your comments about being present. And are there ways not only truly listen, of course, we want to be authentic and truly listen. Are there also behavioral things we can do to demonstrate that we're present? Cathy and Wendy, welcome your thoughts.
Yeah, when we have our Indigenous Cultural Safety training here at Vancouver Coastal, we do talk to people about the fact that we're not always fine. And I like to talk about the fine line. And so this is the line of fine, and this is not feeling fine, and this is feeling over fine, joyous and well. And so in order to be present, we need to be above the fine line, because if we're feeling below the fine line, that means that something has happened where we've had a fight with somebody, or somebody has something has gone wrong in our life, and so it's caused us different emotions, and so we have to bring ourselves back to fine. So I think we have to check in with ourselves, and we need to check in, and it's not easy. I am not saying your jobs are easy on the front lines and trying to respond in a good way to be present. It does take intentionality, is what I will say, in being intentional about being present and being listening with your eye. I know you're taught this, listening with your eyes and your nose and your ears, and then also to say what I heard you say is this, to check in with the patient, because sometimes what you think you've heard is not what they've said. So I'll let Kwelkwáyel7simia expand on that if she'd like to.
Oh, I think you said it very well. Yeah, absolutely. And being mindful of tonality as well, as I shared, it's really important to Indigenous peoples. So we get that you're busy, but, that can be perceived as, unsafe or harmful. So yeah, even just being aware that you may be presenting that way is a good time for you to take that deep breath and then, try to present in a meaningful human way.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Lori Harding was one of our previous speakers who also in attendance. Unfortunately, she had to leave, but she left a really good comment at 12:45. So I welcome people reading it. But Cathy and Wendy, I want to summarize the key point is that the In Plain Sight report gave Health Canada the political mandate and will to name, normalize negative stereotyping as racism and to ensure Indigenous specific anti-racism education competencies become a part of professional certification requirements. I thought that was the heart of that particular comment. Welcome your thoughts about ensuring Indigenous specific anti-racism educational competency for health professionals. Many who are attending are health professions. Maybe perhaps your thoughts about that education piece for health professionals.
Yeah, I'm very grateful to Dr. Lori Harding. I'm also very grateful to Leslie Bonshore and the relationship that we have with Dr. Lori Harding as Vancouver Coastal Health. We really respect her opinion and the work that she has done as a white settler herself in addressing anti-specific Indigenous racism and the calling that she seems to have on her life to move forward in a good way and really help us do that and do that hard work. Because Indigenous specific racism is evident, but not many people feel comfortable leaning in and being an upstander, as Kwelkwáyel7simia talked about. And how do we do that in a good way? What does it look like for us to say something, for us to be able to talk to our friends or family or coworkers about racist behavior, and what does that look like? I know in London they have ambassadors that are set up as anti-racist ambassadors, and that is their role. They're identified by a badge, and they've gone through training in the NHS. They have taken training to learn how to be an ambassador against racism, and so that might be something for us to look at here in British Columbia. Kwelkwáyel7simia, do you have anything to add to?
Yeah, I just wanted to share the teaching that my father gave to me many, many times. He said, every day you have opportunities to learn, and every day you have opportunities to teach. So really being mindful and present to look for those opportunities and share that knowledge or receive that knowledge in a good way when those opportunities present them. And so, yeah, that's part of that being an upstander.
And I do think back to the question that Lori poses, I just reread it in the chat, that she does talk about it becoming an educational requirement as part of the educational training and core competencies that people go through. And I very much support that. And I think that is very wise. And I do believe that is also part of the Truth and Reconciliation recommendations as far as education goes and how education needs to change. So absolutely.
Mm.
Yeah, I think it's wise and also necessary.
Excellent. Thank you very much. I'm going to tie this question with your previous answer, and other anonymous attendee may be the same, may be different, saying that every employee should be expected to complete learning sessions on cultural safety so everyone's on the same page. Many staff are hired from outside the Vancouver coastal community, and they may not have had access to these learning opportunities by the previous employees. How, with Vancouver Coastal and of course around all the organizations with this cultural safety training, how do we welcome new members to join us and participate? Maybe we can start with Vancouver Coastal Health. Maybe Cathy, you can comment on that. And also, how do we not only support learning, but actually help them reflect and actually gain the competence is what I was trying to add to the question. Not just teach, but how do we receive and actually act it out? Welcome your thoughts.
Yeah, I think that you're on the $1 million question, Kendall, of how do we measure the competency once people have learned some education. People do come from all different cultures and backgrounds to teach in healthcare or to support healthcare. And what does it look like for us to be involved in unlearning is sort of how we call it. And how can you measure your unlearning? And I know that there is work being done to develop the competencies. We have a cultural competency that we're designing ourselves in order to help people advance their knowledge. So how are we measuring that? And we also have a research department in Indigenous Health, and I know that Dr. Brittany Bingham has been a part of measuring culturally competence and increase in knowledge, and so her work with the team has been able to do some of that measuring as well. And it's difficult because it's personal bias and it is our own what do we not know about what we're doing in our own blind spots, and how do we move that forward, and what does that look like so that we can change our behavior and present in a good way, approach people in a good way, see things in a good way, and move forward with care that helps decrease Indigenous people from not coming and receiving care, because we know that happens, that people turn away, come to emerge and leave without getting the care that they need. And so that needs to change. That's unacceptable. And we need to have ways that people feel safe so that there is support for the Indigenous patient. And so our plea, as Dr. Don started us off too, is for our friends and family to be able to go into the hospital and not be fearful about the racist care that they may or may not receive that day. So that is sort of our goal in trying to help people move forward. And we know that it is about the individual. This is what we can control, ourselves and our own behaviors. We can't control the behaviors of others, but we can control ourselves, and how are we part of the solution as we do that.
Kwelkwáyel7simia, do you have any additional comments on that? Welcome your thoughts.
Yeah, I just wanted to share, like, in order to be holding people accountable, I think one good way to do that is, to physically write down or store somewhere, like, what is your commitment, like today? What can you commit to today to reconciliation? And then keep that visible for you to check in with yourself in 6 weeks or 3 months or whatever, however long that looks like. And did you achieve that commitment? If so, can you commit more? Did that commitment not work out for you? And were there barriers that we can talk about removing? So that's something that we can take away today, hopefully.
Yeah, I welcome that thought. In fact, I was also thinking a little bit, just to add to it a little bit and welcome your thought, individually, we can kind of make that thinking, whether even, for example, a department, an emergency department, for example, I'm an emergency physician, whether we can demonstrate by saying that, there's some external piece that we can demonstrate as competence. That might be a kind of interesting thought in my mind, but welcome your your reactions on that. All right. Another anonymous attendee, thankfully, I was brought up respecting the Indigenous population. They were called older brother with respect. I think that was such a sweet comment. Thank you very much for saying that. And so really terms of endearment there. This is where the waterfall answers come. I think a lot of wonderful answers. Thank you so much. Everyone will be capturing these. So it'll be reflections. We want to show that to, of course, Cathy and Kwelkwáyel7simia. Still have trouble. I apologize. But really welcome your reflection on that. Here's another question. I learned that there are a variety of reports, and I'll actually bring this to my team in home health to reflect. And you've highlighted some really key reports, and perhaps, whether there's one or two more, or whether we can make a list available so that for those who attend, that we can share that list for the reports to be shared. Are there one or two additional reports that you in your mind? For example, the 21 teachings was great. The 7 sacred teachings also wonderful. Any additional reports or literature that you feel that would be important for us to reflect on? Maybe
yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, go ahead. Just wondering.
Yeah, I was just thinking as you were speaking about some of the public cases that have reports that also have recommendations. Jordan's principles and Joyce's principles. I don't know how many know that Joyce Sḳwx was the visible one that was on the television in Quebec, who was videotaping herself moments before she passed away, and the racist care that she received. And there are principles that have come out of that. So again, I think there are recommendations, and actions just need to be developed in order to move that work forward so that these situations don't happen again. And how do we do that in a good way? And it takes all of us working together on that to do that in a good way. Keegan's story is also another place and another report that has recommendations. Dr. Don has listed some amazing ones in the Q&A. He's talked about Bones of Crows. There's a television series one of my friends is a reader on. And yeah, so there are all kinds of different resources for Indigenous cultural safety, and the learning can continue as you look at podcasts and as you look at literature and books. There are some amazing things out there that can help you move forward in your journey and your learning. But yeah, those are some of the things that come to my mind. Kwelkwáyel7simia, do you have anything to add to what I've already talked about?
It's wonderful in this day and age that we have Grandpa Google to do some research and see what's out there, that information that is available to us. There's so many videos and great readings and books. So I do encourage people to do that self-reflection piece and to take that learning onto their plate.
Absolutely. And of course, being a bit of a nerd myself, there's always ChatGPT also. So it's not just Grandpa Google now. I'm sure I'll try to list a lot of resources for everyone. Erica, thanks for your reflection. I love how this session was framed. Culturally safe care is patient defined. I will take that away from today, and reminds me of social work principles of starting where the client is. Do you see those two phrases synonymous, or do you think there's also kind of similarities and differences between those phrases? Welcome your reflections on that. Starting where the client is, and cultural safe care is patient defined.
I think that they are similar and they're parallel paths, but Indigenous culturally safe care is Indigenous specific. So just wanting to really frame that in that way. But yeah, definitely meeting your patient where they're at, meeting your client where they're at, but also recognizing and understanding that Indigenous culturally safe care is in a different lane, and for the reasons that we've shared in our short time here together.
Excellent. Thank you. Kaylin made the same point. Whether something is culturally safe is decided by the patient, not the healthcare provider. Similar to allyship, you cannot declare yourself as an ally. It's up to whoever's on the receiving end to decide. So, great. Thank you. continue to read through many of the excellent reflections. Thank you very much for those. I'll try to also take out if there are questions there. Oh, this is about the diagram, the equity diagram versus justice. Lydia made the point, justice might also look like Indigenous people sitting in the stands, but also making the goals, actually playing the game, having equal opportunity to spectate and engage. Any comment on that particular point?
Absolutely. I love that point. A lot of my friends and family are active athletes, and some play basketball, some play lacrosse, some play ball hockey. It is all kinds of different sports, and being a part of playing the game, absolutely. It's so great to see Indigenous athletes competing at a higher level. So absolutely, I totally agree with that statement.
Yeah, me too. And that's beautiful, right? And they would be the coaches, right? They would have the funds to put our kids into those programs, to play the sports, to buy the gear, to play at a level where now you're coaching. So absolutely, that's justice. Thank you for that thoughtful comment.
Thank you. Actually, there, I do apologize to folks who type in. If I miss your comment, it's not because it's not important. It is very important. It's just my own failure in my eyesight and glasses and speed of processing in my brain to incorporate yours. So thank you very much, everyone, for your excellent reflection. Maybe this, let me get to this one. Carol Ann said at 12:57, I appreciate the knowledge you have given us today. I did not know that how I approach Indigenous people can have such an impact on the trust they will or won't have in me. I think it's an important point to reflect on. Cathy and Kwelkwáyel7simia, any additional comments on that?
Yeah, it's back to that humanity point, right? It's back to that I'm a human, you're a human, and our interaction is so important in the fact that tone, as Kwelkwáyel7simia shared, and as body language, if you're making, your face, all of those things have a lot to do with the care that's on the receiving end. And so it is our responsibility. How do we show up in the best way that we can?
Yeah, and I also wanted to share the point that, it's really important, and it's not often spoken about, that the tonality and the way you move, and that's leaning into that intergenerational trauma of maybe they were raised in a traumatic environment, and moving quickly towards their physical body can cause that trigger to re-traumatize. So that goes to, that you can go deep down a rabbit hole here, but that's just putting it out there. Just bluntly, right? So thinking about why does that matter? Because some people might think, well, that's silly, like they're just being silly. No, it's really fact-based, and it is based on that intergenerational trauma that people carry, or the trauma that they received in their lifetime, even.
Excellent. This is a good reflection point. And an anonymous attendee said, how can Indigenous folks be actively involved in assessing the quality of care they are receiving to accommodate future improvements to the system? Welcome your thoughts.
Yeah, there's a variety of ways that can be done. I know that Dr. Brittany Bingham and her team are doing research with Indigenous people and doing research in a good way, and trying to help researchers understand how to do that in a culturally safe way. She's done a lot of work on that. And so I think that is part of nothing about us without us, right? What does that look like for us to be in part of the research? What does it look like for us to be a part of moving the system forward? What does it look like for us to be a part of the nursing cohorts? What does it look like for us to be a part of the patient experience and patient voices coming back and being asked in a good way, in a culturally safe way, how we would like to receive our care, and what does that look like? So I have so many thoughts about that on how to do it in a good way, but I think it's important to be thoughtful about that and to pursue it, because again, we all have ability to affect change.
Yeah, absolutely. And then really just adding to that is like giving us a real seat at the table. So not just tokenizing, oh, I wrote this report, check it out, what do you think? Or tell me your horror stories. Like giving us a real meaningful seat at the table to share dialogue in a deep and respectful way on both sides, I think is what's really missing.
Excellent. Another anonymous attendee question, how do the concept and practice of patient-centered care and Indigenous cultural safety and humility relate to each other? How do they relate? Welcome your reflections on that.
Yeah, it's interesting. In my former life at Health Quality BC, they talked about what matters to you. That was a really great question to go in. And I do think that is a great question to approach people with, because you're wanting to know why that person is there today. What matters to them? What's important? And so that's patient-centered. That is the whole basis of what matters to you, is all patient-centered. And again, as an Indigenous person or as an Indigenous patient coming in, you're wanting your care to be based on what your need is. And so having that communication dialogue is patient-centered. And I know that dementiability is also patient-centered care. And dementiability has an opportunity to affect long-term care and to do that based on an individual. And so when I think about being not doing a broad pan-Indigenous approach, that does not exist. There are 204 distinct nations within BC. And so you can't treat one Indigenous person or have one Indigenous person at the table and expect them to speak for everybody. So it is individualized, and that is what patient-centered care is. It's about that one patient, the one perspective, not the masses. It's caring about that one individual and how you can affect their care and their improvements and their health improvements and health disparities. Kwelkwáyel7simia, anything to add?
Yeah, I'm just going to add about Indigenous cultural safety and Indigenous cultural humility. So sometimes that Indigenous cultural safety can be like a checkbox, like I've taken this, now I'm Indigenously culturally safe. So that is an ongoing learning experience, and that's what leans into this Indigenous cultural humility. So being humble, being present, asking questions, recognizing that we don't know everything about everything, and what a boring world it would be if we did.
Wonderful. I want to reflect, Dawn, again, Dr. Wilson, thanks for taking the time also to comment and respond. This is an important point about patient-centered care, Indigenous cultural safety. I'll just quickly read out Dawn's wonderful response. They are definitely overlapping concepts. It all depends on the patient's life context. For Indigenous patients, their life circumstances are highly colored by colonization, historical or present day. It is always critical to contextualize the patient's life, which will be an Indigenous context for Indigenous patients. This is where gentle humility, respect, and questioning around the patient's need come into play. So again, thank you so much for that beautiful reflection there, Dawn. Erica asks, I'd love to hear your thoughts on cultivating self-determination. What can that look like?
I saw this question in the questions, and I reached out to Elder Doris, and I'm like, Elder Doris, I don't know how to answer this. And so Elder Doris did give me some answers, which I'm really grateful for. I'll give her full credit for this. She responded back, being an example, reaching out, asking questions, sitting with elders, and so much more. So thank you, Elder Doris, for helping me with that answer, because as I was thinking about how do you cultivate self-determination, I'm not sure. I don't know, Kwelkwáyel7simia, if you have anything to add to that, but thank you so much, Elder Doris.
Oh no, Elder Doris is the master. She's got her triple PhD in life, so I will take her advice, and I have nothing to add to that.
Wonderful, thank you. Shannon asked, I've seen the graphic of reality, equity, and equality, but justice is rarely included. I'll include it in my education. Where's the graphic from slide 6 come from? Shannon was saying that she's a clinical educator, would like to teach this in my fellow educators.
We're going to take a look about that and see if we can find out where it's from, and we will get back to you. So,
thank you very much. I think, okay, here's another reflection at 116. I think that we ought to, rather than say, do things in a good way, which really isn't clear, we need to be clear by saying we will treat our patients to help them feel culturally, emotionally, mentally safe. So it's not just a generality of saying that we do good things, but be very specifically about cultural, emotional, and mental wellness and safety. How's that sound?
Yeah, I think that part of why we say to do things in a good way, we'll often talk about an elder starting our meeting in a good way and setting a culturally safe space in a good way. So I think that's part of what we're meaning when we talk about a good way. But I do take the separation of culturally safe and emotionally safe and all of that as part of what is being said here. I think that that also does apply in thinking about just maybe her comment is about the generalization of good being so much deeper. And so I would agree with that and concur.
All right. Good stuff. Shannon wrote, I found when I read about the MMIWG report that I often see that the two-spirited community is not named. I was looking for T-shirts recently for MMIWG Two-Spirit, and they are really hard to find. I see that Reclaiming Power and Place, the final report of the National Inquiry in Missing and Murder Indigenous Women and Girls, include 2S LGBTQIA people on page 49. Why do you think they're not named in the title of the reports or discussed more often? Welcome thoughts about that.
So my thought on this is because it is missing and murdered Indigenous women primarily, and there have been a few Two-Spirit and LGBTQ, but the majority, and maybe that's part of it, is that that is a minority part of the actual report. So not everyone who has gone murdered or missing has identified in a different way. So that's part of why the report. I don't know if you have any thoughts to add to that, Kwelkwáyel7simia.
I don't know. I can't speak to why they're not named in the reports, but I sit on the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women, Girls, Two-Spirit committee, and I have sat on it for many, many years, and it's a very near and dear to my heart. So I want you to know that I do include that when I'm presenting.
Kasha made a comment, a very good one, about dignity therapy. Encourage each healthcare professional to ask the patient, what do I need to know about you as an individual, a patient, or your history, so that I and your care team can provide you with the care you need in a safe environment? It only takes a few minutes to answer. It makes a huge difference for the patients. I see vertical knots for sure. I know we're coming close to 1:30. I have perhaps one question, because I myself is involved in a lot of virtual care, seeing patients not in person, but for example, going through a phone call or video conferencing, etc. What might be some of your tips, Cathy and Kwelkwáyel7simia, in those virtual care environment? How might we make it safer for our patients, or what should I be more cognizant about in those contexts I want to interact with Indigenous patients?
Go first? Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, I think a lot of what we've shared today is going to be important. So being relational, introducing yourself in that relational way, as Cathy and I shared when we're doing our introductions, certainly when I'm doing my introduction, as I've been taught, we talk about where we're from, what territories that are claiming us. And so that may be able to build that relationship there. And then tonality and being present. I think the backside of that is ensuring that that patient has access to internet, has a safe environment to have that appointment with you, and potentially has a family member present to help speak on their behalf if need be, is also the flip side of that coin.
So thank you. Cathy?
I don't have anything to add to that. That's great.
Wonderful. Well, let me take this opportunity. Really want to thank both of you, Cathy and Kwelkwáyel7simia. Just amazing session and a really wonderful dialogue, and really help us to have a deep understanding about uplifting cultural safety in our clinical context. I think there are a lot of learning points here, and I also welcome and thank the audience for all your reflections, because I myself, reading through it, already learning a lot about how I can change myself and kind of move forward towards that. So really appreciate this wonderful time. And also I want to thank Elder Doris to make this such a sacred space for us to have a really deep dialogue together and put us in a good frame of mind in the beginning. Again, I want to thank you both. I want to thank Vancouver Coastal Health, Indigenous Health. I want to thank Ministry of Health, as a key partner, Vancouver Physician Staff Association, and also First Nations Health Authority as partners with the Intercultural Online Health Network and Digital Emergency Medicine to put on this round. And so everyone, thank you so much. On the link, you can see that there is a feedback. We really value your feedback of these rounds. So please take a couple of moments to fill this out. And we look forward to seeing you December 4th at noon for our next round. And we're looking forward to that encounter together. Everyone, happy Tuesday. You take care. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.